An ex-FEMA employee claims, well, avoiding MAGA homes are within the policy, took the fall for nothing. Here's what our dear brother Roland Martin said.
And I'll let you know that we've had now several, because 3 is several from me, poor encounters on this street that have made the team uncomfortable. And I will let him know we need to move on from here. But the important thing is here, once we start seeing a trend, for example, if they just so happen to have these Trump campaign signs in front of their home, and that's the characteristic that's coming along with that, we have to proceed with precaution. So avoidance first and then de-escalation. And that's the thing. Our superiors know that. We have constant conversations about keep your people safe. If your people are uncomfortable, then just don't go. This is not just isolated to Florida. Check out what's going on in the Carolinas. There's so many news articles where we have been people coming after FEMA employees with guns, targeting us to kill us, not realizing that we're just fellow Americans like they are, and we want to go back home to our families too.
We have reported on multiple instances where FEMA employees have been targeted as if they are somehow not trying to provide the information that the taxpayer has paid for. Put it up full mass. Let me give you the background to this. Her name is Marn'i Washington, Ms. Washington, the FEMA supervisor who was fired for telling relief workers to bypass the homes of supporters of President-elect Donald Trump in the wake of devastating hurricanes this fall, spoke out with Roland Martin on Tuesday and insisted the policy is commonplace in the federal agency. FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell announced on Saturday that Washington had been let go after she told relief workers to, quote, avoid homes advertising Trump in Florida. Criswell claimed Washington did not uphold the, quote, core values of FEMA. In a statement, Criswell said, quote, more than 22,000 FEMA employees every day adhere to FEMA's core values and are dedicated to helping people before, during, and after disasters, often sacrificing time with their own families to help disaster survivors. Recently, one FEMA employee departed from these values to advise her survivor assistance team to not go to homes with yard signs supporting President-elect Trump, Criswell said. However, Ms. Washington pushed back on this during her appearance on Roland Martin's show, claiming one of the, quote, core values of FEMA is to avoid potentially hostile encounters, which they attributed to Trump supporters in the wake of the hurricanes ripping through the Southeast. She flat out accused FEMA of, quote, lying about the situation. Ms. Washington also told Martin that FEMA pushes for a strategy of avoidance and shared a text message exchange with one relief worker who said they were avoiding a certain road in Florida because it was politically hostile, populated by open Trump supporters. The fired FEMA worker explains that avoidance of Trump homes is part of a strategy to steer clear of unwelcome behavior, claiming Trump voters are typically more hostile towards federal workers. Now, you're really in an unprecedented situation, just to be frank, okay? While FEMA absolutely has an avoidance policy, that avoidance policy has not typically been associated with a presidential candidate or one who has recently won a presidential contest. However, in this case, you have identifiers and you have correlation. What's the correlation? Well, seemingly the vast majority of homes that a FEMA worker goes to that is hostile, they are in fact Trump supporters. And when they are able to be recognized as a Trump supporter via a yard sign, et cetera, it becomes such a strong correlation that you can now argue causation, which is the rhetoric and the lies and the rumor mill that started out of the Trump camp. And so now you have all these conspiracies about FEMA. So you got a correlation, you have causation, and now you enact or engage in your policy of avoidance. I do believe FEMA had a responsibility to thoughtfully do this, which means they should have engaged in a more cohesive campaign in attempts to protect FEMA employees. Firing a supervisor who is in an unprecedented situation like these employees doesn't solve your problem, because the misinformation and disinformation still permeates inside of those Trump homes everywhere. This didn't solve a damn thing. All right. So Washington also told Martin, if you look at the record, there is what we call a community trend. And it just so happened that the political hostility that was encountered by my team, and I was on two different teams during this deployment, they just so happened to have the Trump campaign signage. FEMA always preaches avoidance first and then de-escalation. So this is not isolated. This is a colossal event of avoidance, not just in the state of Florida, but you will find avoidance in the Carolinas. So she's saying, if you look at the history, you're going to see that we have these dynamics where there's a community trend. All right. So what does community trend mean? Community trend means they can look at correlation. They can look at correlation. They don't have to determine causation per se, because they can review correlation and say, based on the correlation or the community trend, we're going to have to avoid this particular area or these particular homes. The only reason why this becomes a news story is because of the political dynamic associated with the ordeal. But the rules are still the rules. If the vast majority of people pulling out guns on FEMA workers and being openly hostile and threatening them criminally are the ones that have a correlation of a Trump sign in their yard or some other identifier as a Trump supporter, I don't see why that would not also qualify as a community trend. There's more. She continues, senior leadership. Senior leadership will lie to you and tell you they do not know. But if you ask the DSA crew, leads, and specialists what they are experiencing in the field, they will tell you, demand for FEMA to give you those incident reports, open records. Washington explained she has been a reservist for FEMA since 2019, meaning she also maintained a civilian job and only worked full-time for FEMA during deployments or relief efforts. She said she has also lost her civilian job following FEMA's firing of her. This has had repercussions beyond FEMA. All right, Jordan, thoughts here?
Well, I mean, I'm a bit skeptical that this was official policy or guidance, but let's just say it was. I don't know. I don't feel great about it. I mean, the one thing I see often, and maybe we all see it, is during moments of natural disasters that hit red states, you'll see some liberals like celebrating it almost, like, oh, you got what you voted for. You voted for Trump, or you voted for whomever, and they deny climate change, and this is what you get. I don't love that, because there are many people in these areas who might be stuck there, might not be able to afford to move, who are suffering. And maybe just because you're surrounded by a couple Trump people, maybe you got skipped or you didn't get help. So I like and support a system where everybody, regardless of their ideology or political beliefs, gets care, gets aid, gets relief from these agencies if they need it. I don't think any of us would support a system where a fire department doesn't put out a fire at a Trump supporter's home. It's a social service. It should work for everybody. So if this is true, I'm not thrilled about it, and it's disappointing.
Yeah, and it should never have been a remedy for somebody on the ground to figure out. If you see the correlation or the community trend that these particular homes are unsafe, just as you would when you'll say, okay, well, this community is unsafe, or there was a crime spree on this street and it's been deemed unsafe. Well, that means that the higher ups must engage in some kind of thoughtful program, or at least a campaign, in order to make sure that people are aware that there's no threat to them, or just make sure that the FEMA workers have the right security with them, law enforcement personnel, et cetera. Treat them as you would want others to be treated when it comes to safety in the government. But for the people on the ground to have to make this decision was insane to me.